Make sure the stream is up. Looks good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. Nice to see you all. Welcome also to the students attending the Satsang online. We have a lot of great questions as always, so let us proceed. This question comes from Krishna, who lives in Boston, and he asks about the species evolution. And he says, no other species other than human beings have ever gained enlightenment. And he leads to a question, I wonder why Ishvara designed a natural cosmic order in which billions of years no one had any chance for enlightenment, despite repeated births. Human beings didn't exist until 200 million years ago. The universe, this planet has been around for 4.5. I'm boring you with all these numbers, silly. Anyway, so this is Krishna's point, and that is the Earth has existed for billions of years, and there's no possibility of anyone getting enlightened. He mentions dinosaurs. I doubt that dinosaurs ever got enlightened, being facetious. There are two ways of answering this question. One is we're only talking about life on this planet. How do we know that conscious beings who are equal or greater than human beings could possibly exist on other planets? We have no idea, none. And there's no way to prove it, no way to disprove it. It's just a possibility. But I think the better way of answering Krishna's question is to look at his use of the word why. Why did Ishvara create the world in this manner? Why is a question into cause-effect, right? What made Ishvara create the world like this? What inspired him to create the world like this? Well, Ishvara is not like your uncle. Ishvara has no free will. Ishvara has no agenda. Ishvara is the karma pala data, the one who makes this cycle of karma keep going. And so based on past karmas, when you say past karmas, karmas from the doctrine of karma gets a little flaky here. To try to merge modern cosmology and the doctrine of karma, they don't always fit together here. So let me just be a little bit casual in my explanation of the doctrine of karma. And that is to say that Ishvara created this universe based on karmas. This universe is created in a natural way for the sake of allowing living beings to have their karmas fructified. So it's not that Ishvara, as I said, Ishvara is not like your uncle. Your uncle has his own agenda, his own plans. Ishvara has no agenda. Ishvara is not like a human being. Question from Prashanto in Bangladesh. Does time and space, by the way, whenever we get a question from Prashanto, can't help but think that this is a tough time for Hindus living in Bangladesh. And I hope Prashanto and all of our Hindu friends in Bangladesh, hope they're doing well. Not that Hindus are doing so well in Pakistan and other places, but just Bangladesh is in our thoughts. He asks, does time and space exist, or are they just mental constructs, according to Vedanta Advaita Vedanta does not say they are mental constructs. Vedanta says the world is as real as it seems, but it's not absolutely real. This is the proper way of understanding Vedanta's perspective on the world. Time and space are part of the world, natural parts of the world, and Vedanta doesn't really care to get into explaining, how is this? Time and space, are there 3 dimensions or 4? Einstein suggested that that time is a 4th dimension. So, who cares? As students of Advaita Vedanta, scientific knowledge is not our goal. So we leave the world. The world is what it is. We need to understand the world sufficiently so we understand who we are and what is our place in the world, for the sake of our Vedantic self-inquiry. But we don't require much more than that, so a very superficial understanding of the world is sufficient. But definitely time and space are natural parts of the world. The world is not a mental construct. There are some schools of thought that claim that. Western school of thought called idealism will claim that the world is a mental construct. 1 or 2 schools of Buddhism will claim that the world is a mental construct, and a splinter group of Advaita Vedanta. Notice I said splinter group, not mainstream Advaita Vedanta, but a small group. There are a handful of texts which kind of go off from the mainstream, and they go off in their own direction, and they have a theory that the world is a mental construct. If you want to learn more about it, Drishti Srishti Vada, you can look it up. Drishti Srishti Vada is that non-mainstream Vedantic theory that the world is a mental construct, but that's not accepted by Shankaracharya and all the mainstream Vedantins. Okay, next question from Ajay, who lives in Melbourne. Nice. And Ajay asks, if the sukshma sharira reincarnates due to karma, so sukshma sharira is our fancy Vedantic word to describe that which travels. The physical body doesn't travel, consciousness doesn't travel. What travels are certain faculties of the body, which make up the individuality of a person, and that is said to travel, called sukshma sharira, subtle body. It reincarnates due to karma. Then how does an enlightened being not reincarnate? And this is all according to the doctrine of karma. The reincarnation of an unenlightened person is driven because the unenlightened person has performed certain deeds for which the results have yet to fructify. And for the sake of the fructification of those actions already committed, the unenlightened person is driven then by the laws of karma to take another birth. The enlightened person, however, the common expression when you say I think Shvetashvatara Upanishad says, the enlightened person has broken the bonds of karma. Common expression, karma bandha. The bonds of karma have been broken. And if it says then that the enlightened person is no longer subject to the laws of karma because the so-called bonds of karma have been broken. What does that mean? And it's a little technical, but let me just give a brief explanation, not a full one. The brief explanation is this. The unfructified karmas belong to the whoever did the karma. If you do a karma, you get the result. What happens if the one who does the karma no longer exists. And that's the case for the enlightened person. For the enlightened person, the doer, the karta, that individuality, has been destroyed by knowledge. Karta, and this is a technical part, kartritva, the sense of being an agent of action, is due to ignorance. Vedanta leads you to discover that you are unchanging consciousness. Unchanging consciousness doesn't do anything. Therefore, you are not a karta, agent of action. Before enlightenment, I did it. After enlightenment, it got done. How's that? Switch to the passive voice. So before enlightenment, I did it. And after enlightenment, it happened. But I didn't do it. And therefore, the enlightened person, since there no longer is an agent of action, is no longer bound by the laws of karma. Then, this is from Arun in Bangalore. Does Ishvara have free will? And we just discussed that. And he goes on to say that unimaginable horror has been perpetrated by the human race in the name of God. And his will has become a convenient scapegoat for the misadventures of mankind. Actually, the interesting point. So it's less to do with free will, I think, and more to do with how religions envision God. First of all, from our Vedantic standpoint, Ishvara is not, as I said before, it's not like your uncle in New Delhi who has a government position and who can pull strings for you. That's my stock example. Ishvara is the best way to understand Ishvara in this context is karma phala data. The one who makes sure that, let me put it another way, that's not helpful. The one who created the laws of the universe, the one whose intelligence is manifest as the laws of the universe, causing the law of karma to continue functioning. So in that way, notice what I just did is I removed kartritva from Ishvara. Because and the reason I did this, if you're wondering, if Ishvara is an agent of action, and Ishvara creates the universe, yeah, I did a good job, you know, that kind of thing. If he has that sense of being an agent of action, wouldn't Ishvara be bound by karma and not enlightened? So we have to present this karma paladata, the giver of the fruits of action, as an expression we actually use when talking about karma yoga, and karma yoga is not our topic right now. So instead of calling Ishvara karma paladata, which is more of a karma yoga context definition, we can say Ishvara is the author of the laws of the universe, which include natural laws, laws of physics, and includes the laws of karma. So no free will. And here's a funny thing. If Ishvara had free will, he'd be able to change the laws of the universe. And which means sometimes things could fall down, but if Ishvara changes his mind, they could start falling up. That's free will. Does Ishvara have the kind of free will to cause objects to fall up? That's silly, right? Okay. So Ishvara does not have free will in that sense. But I think Arun's question is a little different here. He's talking about how God's will is attributed by some religious followers to justify certain actions. And this is a little bit of a complicated thing. How about, let's give some examples. By the way, these examples sound harsh. I do not mean to criticize any religion, but these are just statements that are commonly made. I don't make them, I don't agree with them, but they're commonly made. So, according to some Muslims, in the Quran, the revelation of Allah, actually it's not Allah's revelation, the revelation to the Prophet Muhammad is that kafirs should be killed. And therefore, and then they take it a step further. So that's the revelation to the Prophet, that non-Muslims should be killed. I doubt the Quran actually says it in so many words, but there are many people who claim that's what the Quran says. And then they take one more step, and that is the Quran is our sacred scripture, and therefore it is Allah's will that these non-Muslims be killed. And there are at least two levels of mistake there. First of all, that God has will. Allah has will. If Allah is what they call Allah is the same as what we call Ishvara. There's different names for the same reality. And there's plenty of Vedanta to show that Ishvara has no will. Whether you call Ishvara Allah or not doesn't make any difference. Has no will. Second problem is how they look upon the Quran. The Quran was a revelation to the Prophet, and how do we know if there is a statement in the Quran which seems to justify this? And I don't know. I'm not a student of the Quran. If there is such a statement, maybe we've misunderstood the statement. Maybe the statement is incorrect. Maybe what do they say? The wires got crossed, and during the revelation taking place to the Prophet, we don't know, but there are many other ways of interpreting a statement if it seems to imply that. So for both of these reasons, that would be a misinterpretation, and to say it is God's will that non-Muslims get. I'm pausing right now because I'm thinking about my next example. I'm going to get in trouble on this one. And it is some Jews claim that according to the Old Testament, the Torah, that the Jews are God's chosen people, and that the lands of Palestine belong to them, ancient Judea. So that's their claim. And therefore they say it's God's will that we should take over all of Palestine. This is such a common problem with every religion. When you have a political agenda, let me make it more general. Suppose you belong to any religion and you have a political agenda. What do? You know what you do. You use your religion to support your political agenda. And if it doesn't exactly say that, then you twist it a little bit to make it say that. This is one of the most common things done around the world for centuries. And it's a sad abuse of religion. And this is one of the reasons religion has such a bad name for intellectuals today. Say religion is the cause for suffering. So many atheists, many intellectuals will make that claim. Religion is at fault for so many of the world's problems. I would just modify that statement to say, not religion, but religious people. Religion doesn't do anything. Religion is a doctrine. It's people who cause problems, and in particular, people with political agendas. So someone with a political agenda, to restate this, someone with a political agenda who belongs to a particular religion can use or abuse the doctrines of their religion to support their political agenda. Given that understanding, can we really say it's religion's fault? I think that's a wrong conclusion. I think, in my opinion, every religion has its defects, including Hinduism, without question. But I would say that the benefit of religion is far greater than the harms caused by religion. And I mean all the world's religions, not just Hinduism. The benefits of religion far outweigh the negatives, and these abuses of religion are not innate to the religion. It's the product of people who abuse religion for the sake of political agendas. Okay, next. Okay, this is a question from Lolita, who lives in France. Nice. Lolita, a little long email. Let me just say. Let's see. And she refers to J Krishnamurti, his approach to self-inquiry, in which many of his talks he says that the observer is the observed. The observer is the observed. And it's a little bit of a problematic statement. We'll come back to it. That there is no separation between the two. That the illusion of division is what gives rise to confusion and suffering. This is according to J Krishnamurti. J Krishnamurti, who never had the opportunity to properly study Advaita Vedanta. He was, many of you know, what a remarkable story. Let me not give you all the details. But from childhood on, he was fed a diet of Vedanta and occultism, all mixed up. And he was being groomed to be the next leader of, anyway, the very complex story. Look, if you don't know this story, just go and find out. It'd take me half an hour. Just one of the most bizarre stories that you'll ever hear about a spiritual leader. Anyway, so the first point I want to make is J Krishnamurti's teachings are in some places consistent with Advaita Vedanta, but in many places inconsistent with the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. And that leads to Lolita's problem, is she's trying to reconcile the two. So she says that J Krishnamurti says, observer is observed. However, in your teachings, and those of others I often hear, we hear references to the knower and the known, the seer and the seen, which is the same as observer and observed. But when we use this, when a Vedanta says knower and known, that creates a duality. So J Krishnamurti says there's no duality between observer and observed. Advaita Vedanta says there is a duality between observer and observed. And it leads to confusion when you see these two very different things. In fact, even in this is two problems. One is the inconsistency between J Krishnamurti and Advaita Vedanta, and the other is, and this is perhaps more to the point, J Krishnamurti taught a philosophy. Advaita Vedanta is not a philosophy. So now we're comparing apples and oranges. J Krishnamurti was a philosopher. In fact, he rejected the title of spiritual teacher, guru. If you addressed him Guruji, he'd stop you. I'm not your guru. He considered himself a teacher, and specifically a teacher of philosophy. A teacher of philosophy is one who imparts philosophical knowledge. Part of the philosophical knowledge he imparted was there's no duality between observer and observed. So first problem I have with that statement is from the standpoint of philosophy, does that statement match your experience or not? In your experience, is there no division between observer and observed? Or, in your experience, do you find that you are an observer and things that are observed are separate from you? There is a division. So, in our common, ordinary experience, there is a distinction between observer and observed. J Krishnamurti follows a philosophy, in fact I referred to before, the philosophy of idealism, which says in so many words that the world indeed is a mental construct. The world is a projected illusion. It's a very common philosophical teaching made not just by J Krishnamurti, but by many, many others. The world is an illusion. The world is a mental construct. Based on that philosophical teaching, J Krishnamurti says there's no separation between observer and observed. This is a philosophical point. Vedanta rejects that philosophical point and then does, what is it? End around? That's an American, when I use these American idioms, I think about where does that come from? I think it's a reference to American football. Is it? So unless you know American football, that's not going to make any sense. Anyway, it's end around means an unusual strategy. We'll put it like that. So Advaita Vedanta is not a philosophy. It's a methodology which uses lots of unusual strategies, one of which is a stepping stone strategy. You say one thing, and then you up-level it. Then you up-level that one. Then you up-level that one. And this is how Advaita Vedanta works. It begins with your experience. Do you experience duality or do you experience non-duality? We experience duality. That's where Vedanta begins. And then that's like first stepping stone. Well, about 25 stepping stones in the future, that duality gets resolved. Not immediately. That duality is very helpful in understanding our experience and especially in understanding the solution to the problem of suffering. And this is why Vedanta is not a philosophy. The purpose of Advaita Vedanta is not to impart philosophical wisdom. The purpose of Vedanta is to solve the problem of human suffering, and it does so by leading you to discover your true nature, Atma. So that being said, Vedanta does indeed begin with this division between observer and observed. The fact that it uses words like knower and known, that's beside the point. They're the same. Observer is knower. Observed, known. They're the same thing. So Vedanta is more subtle, I would say, in that it begins by accepting your experience of knower and known and then working with it until finally that gets resolved. And how it gets resolved is, I think, beyond the scope of our question. And just to continue to the last part of Lolita's question, I'm especially curious about this question when it comes to experiencing strong emotions like jealousy or anger. So look at this. If you're experiencing jealousy and anger, and if you were in J Krishnamurti's audience, he used to sit and teach, gather people around. You just sit in a simple wooden chair, and he would just sit there. He was a remarkable teacher, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, but he would just sit there and answer questions. And so suppose J Krishnamurti is sitting there, and you asked him how to handle jealousy and anger, and he says, there's no separation between you and you observer and observed, the person for whom you have anger or jealousy, there's no separation. The presence of anger and jealousy in your mind are observed by you. You are the observer of the anger and jealousy of your mind, but there's no separation. Now, by saying there's no separation, does that address the problem of anger and jealousy? So this is what some of the uniqueness of Vedanta is it acknowledges. It begins by acknowledging duality as part of our experience, and then it helps us navigate this world of duality and come out the other end, so to speak, where there is no duality. So a very different approach. So J.K. was a philosopher. Advaita Vedanta is not a philosophy. Let me pause here and see if are there questions here. Any other question in back? You need the microphone, yes. This one, no, this one.
Swamiji, earlier you were referring to sukshma sharira of an enlightened being. If a person is enlightened, the knowledge, you said, destroys the sukshma sharira.
I didn't say that.
Okay. So
I said it destroyed the bondage of karma.
Okay. So the living person who is enlightened, he still has sukshma sharira.
Otherwise, he wouldn't be a living person.
Okay. I get that. So after he passes away, what happens to the sukshma sharira?
Excellent question. So what happens to, let me push this one, yeah. So what happens at death, first of all, to the stula sharira, pretty obvious, gets burnt, it goes back to, it comes from stula elements, it goes back to stula elements. So sukshma sharira is composed not of physical elements, but of so-called subtle elements, non-physical. So physical body is composed of physical stuff, subtle body is composed of non-physical stuff. So at death, the physical body goes back to physical elements, subtle body goes back to subtle elements, dissolves. Yeah. And what's more interesting is why, when an unenlightened person, why doesn't the sukshma sharira return to subtle elements? It would be like putting the body in the fire and it doesn't burn. Can you imagine the shock of people seeing that body there doesn't burn? Yes, there are mythological stories about such things happening, but we're not talking about mythology here. So that's the equivalent, though, for this sukshma sharira maintaining its integrity, and that's again an effect of the force of karma. So the laws of karma ensure that once there has been an action, there must be the associated result. And if you die before that result has happened, that's very inconvenient. Sorry, I'm making a bad joke. Very inconvenient in the sense that now the laws of karma have to ensure somehow that that result gets fructified, and for the sake of doing it, it maintains the integrity of the subtle body at the time of death. So the integrity of the subtle body is maintained for the sake of the fructification of karmas, and you may have heard me refer to this as an karmic glue holds that sukshma sharira together. Okay, one more question here.
So a few meditations ago, after the meditation lecture class, my friend, it was regarding like miracles or something, and my friend said, well, there's like first-hand accounts of like Neem Karoli Baba, where there's verifiable accounts where and people have there's so many backings in the stories where people have witnessed certain encounters or whatever. Like, I personally don't know, like, because the thing is that I said, like, no miracles have happened to me yet, so I don't really know. And I don't really have any beliefs. Like, if someone tells me piranhas are real,
Okay,
I'll be
so your
like,
question is, do
Yeah.
miracles occur?
well, no, so
What is your question?
it's more so that like, what about these first-hand accounts of, like, people saying that?
Sure. Okay. Many people report miracles. First of all, before we can... Oh, thank you. No, I got it back, right? Ah, there we go. This, if you're looking at the screen, this one is delayed. That's the stream. So you see the stream on the left and the live on the right. Okay. Before we can answer your question, what is a miracle? And let's get a specific definition. A miracle is when the laws of nature get changed. Go back to our earlier discussion. A miracle is when Ishvara changes his mind. Already we're on shaky ground, but yet many miracles are reported. Tell me, what is more likely, that Ishvara has changed his mind, or that an individual person has misinterpreted an experience? Both are possible. But it strikes me that one is way more possible than the other. It's hard to imagine Ishvara changing his mind, but we know people mistake their experiences all the time. And by the way, an extension of that is that in the field of law, they've discovered that eyewitness testimony is frequently wrong. Frequently, not occasionally. Which means there are people in jail today because of this wrong eyewitness testimony. So no matter how convinced you are about what you see or what you experienced, you can be wrong. Okay, let's take some more questions here. We've got a question from Amit. Where is it? There it is. Amit lives in India. When we talk about papa karmas and punya karmas, good and bad karmas, are we putting a label on them? Not so much. I think that, let me go on. Does Ishvara, karma paladata, look upon them as mirror actions and dispatch results without judgment if they are good and bad? We humans label them. Good. Let me explain this. Good and bad indeed are labels. Good applies to you, and you've heard me give the example. Do you like Karela, this Indian bitter gourd? Half of you like it, half of you don't. I'm on the fence. I like it when it's prepared in certain ways. Okay. So, but it shows how arbitrary the labels good and bad are. But punya karma and papa karma are not arbitrary. We do use the word good karma and bad karma. Maybe that's a mistake. We shouldn't use the words good karma and bad karma. If we admit that good and bad are arbitrary labels, then technically we shouldn't use it for good karma and bad, for punya papa karmas. In fact, instead of saying good karma and bad karma, we should say punya karma, papa karma. Then there's no confusion. And it's non-arbitrary because punya karma gives you desirable results. Papa karma gives you undesirable results. That's not arbitrary. That which causes you suffering is not arbitrary. So this is our understanding of punya and papa karma. Also, are karmas restricted to individuals, or is there land karma, family ancestral karma, community karmas? There are such a thing as community karmas, but it doesn't belong to the land. Karma can only belong to a person, right? Because karma is a result of an action. Can land commit actions? Don't tell me about earthquakes. That's kind of stretching the idea a little bit too far. So, karma can only belong to individual persons, beings, but they can belong to groups of individuals. So we can speak of a kind of a group karma in certain situations. Maybe a nation can have a certain kind of karma, but definitely not land. Next question is from Ayush. Ayush lives in UP, Uttar Pradesh. Let's see. After hearing that the real nature, this is an interesting question. See, you can get this. After hearing that the real, so Ayush has been learning some Advaita Vedanta. He's heard that the real nature of Brahman, and having heard these teachings, let me paraphrase a little bit. Having studied some of these teachings of Advaita Vedanta, Ayush says that he is practicing constant supervision of my mind to withdraw it from desire, praise, fear, and opposing thoughts. Finally, I realized the truth. And the truth is conscious awareness. And he says, when I am focused on conscious awareness, I feel immense peace and unshakable calmness, but sometimes I find myself struggling to maintain that state. Okay, this is a very good question, something interesting and something important for us to discuss. So, by focusing on certain aspects of these teachings, Ayush creates a sense of inner contentment and peace. And that sense of inner contentment and peace depends on maintaining his mind in a certain state or condition. So here's a question. Is it possible to have a permanent condition of your mind? It's not possible. The nature of the mind is to go on changing. It's wonderful that Ayush is having this experience, but here's a problem that not just Ayush, a mistake, excuse me. This is a mistake made not just by Ayush, but I would say close to a majority of spiritual seekers, and that is to think, I've had this blissful experience, now all I have to do is stretch out this blissful experience and make it my permanent reality. That's a very common mistake in spiritual life, because it's not too difficult to have this kind of spiritual experience as Ayush has had. It's wonderful to have this spiritual experience. And you see, he says it's immense peace and unshakable calmness. How wonderful such experiences are. They're very inspiring and even helpful if we don't make this mistake. What is the mistake? To take that brief experience and stretch it out into something permanent. That's not the way our minds work. So what is the solution then? The solution has to be independent of the state of your mind. Wow, think about that. The solution must necessarily be independent of your mind. How does Vedanta do that? Not too difficult. And I think Ayush will be studying more. Ayush will discover that as his studies continue. What he'll discover is that Vedanta leads you to understand that your true nature, consciousness, is already full, complete, divine, boundaryless, limitless, untouched by any kind of worldly suffering. It's already perfect. Your true nature as consciousness is already, in fact, your consciousness doesn't need Vedanta, doesn't need experiences, doesn't need peace. It's the very nature of consciousness is peace and contentment. The problem is that we get confused about mind and consciousness. Where does one end and the other begin? This is our experience, that mind and consciousness are so interwoven that whatever is happening in our mind seems to affect consciousness. So if the mind is peaceful, then consciousness is peaceful. If the mind is agitated, then consciousness is agitated. What Vedanta leads you to discover is that what happens to your mind doesn't affect consciousness. They call this viveka, discernment. We need to discern where the mind ends, where consciousness begins, but definitely what Vedanta doesn't teach is that you have to maintain your mind in a certain condition. It's simply impossible. Not only is it impossible, it'll drive you nuts. God, can you imagine, it creates stress. Can you imagine if you're really trying to maintain that thought? Stressful. Here, I'll give you a 5-second stressful assignment. For the next 5 seconds, don't think of an elephant. Don't! I'll start shouting at you. You really get stressed out. Stop! And this is the nature of the mind. Okay, a couple more, and then we're done. This is from Agreta. Agreta. Trying to think of the derivation of the name. Agreta. I'm thinking of the Sanskrit, and I don't get any Sanskrit for the name. Anyway, Greta asks, why is Brahman called SatChitAnanda and not just SatChit? Is it because of Advaita Vedanta's perspective pertaining to only sentient beings? And Vedanta is a very sophisticated teaching. To describe reality, you should use the minimum number of words. You've heard of the principle of Occam's razor. You should not, the world is round because planets are round and because the sky is blue. And because, wait a minute. So that's an example of a violation of the principle of Occam's razor. You're adding something unnecessary. So what you want is a minimum, like on a vitamin jar, minimum daily requirement. So according to this principle, and by the way, in Sanskrit, we have the same principle. They call it not Occam's razor, perhaps a Greek expression. This is called, in Sanskrit, laghavam. Laghu means light. So you should use the minimum to explain something clear. The more you add to it, the more confusing it gets. And the ancient rishis discovered that the minimum to describe reality are these 3 words, Sat, Chit, Ananda. And why these 3 words? Sat means that which exists. Reality has to exist. Chit, consciousness. Reality includes Chit and Jada, Chetana and Jada. We see consciousness pervading the universe, intelligence pervading the universe. And then there's a 3rd principle called Ananda. obviously Ananda in this context cannot possibly mean an experience of bliss, but it rather tells us something about this Sat and Chit. Because Sat could just be stuff. Chit could just be consciousness. But there's a further dimension, that this Sat Chit has no edge, has no boundary, has no beginning, has no end, is not an ordinary thing in the world. Oh, there's SatChit, there's SatChit, there's SatChit. It puts the SatChit in a different level, in the level of absolute reality. So the word Ananda hints at the fact that this Sat and Chit, this existence and consciousness, are not ordinary. It is a fundamental reality. This word Ananda is used for that. Frequently in commentaries, instead of Ananda, the author will use Ananta, limitless, boundaryless, infinite. And then she goes on, second question, Brahman can only be experienced as it cannot be objectified. And that's a highly problematic statement. Brahman can only be experienced as it cannot be objectified. Brahman cannot be experienced if anything you experience is an object of your experience. This is it. If you experience something, it is an object to you. You are the subject, it is an object. So since Brahman cannot be objectified, which she correctly says, therefore Brahman cannot be experienced. We could say, and I'm going to cut this short because we're going to end our satsang here in just a moment, but the clever way of saying it, Brahman is not an object of experience. Brahman is the content of experience. Think about that just for a moment. Brahman is not an object of experience. Brahman is the content of experience, which means experience exists because of Brahman. Brahman is the essence of experience. Okay, one more question. This is from Gordon. Does Vedanta say anything about the nature of time? I'm in a mood for bad jokes. Yes, time lasts a long time. There are, I think in a technical text on Vedanta, they talk about 7 infinites, one of which is time, that which is boundless. It seems like events unfold in time, but if it's taken as fundamental, this entails a duality. If it's taken as a fundamental, doesn't time entail a duality between then and now? And here we come to one of the common mistakes about duality and non-duality in Advaita Vedanta. Vedanta treats the world as duality. We experience duality, and part of the experience of duality is time. Yesterday and today are different, right? This is duality. Tomorrow will be different. There's lots of duality in worldly experience. So duality is a fact of worldly existence. But worldly existence exists depending upon a more fundamental existence. Our common Vedantic explanation, the existence of this pot depends upon clay. Clay has duality. Pot has duality. It has a top, it has a bottom, has an inside, has an outside. You get the idea. So there's duality. Clay, in this metaphor, so just staying with the metaphor, clay has no duality, metaphorically speaking. Don't tell me about a lump of clay. That's not the metaphor. So the pot, name and form, nama rupa, duality, but the underlying reality is non-dual clay, metaphorically speaking. In the same way, we live in a world of duality, but the world of duality exists dependent upon a non-dual substratum equivalent to the clay. Now, the final point, and we'll end with this. Tell me, if you want to understand fundamental reality, should you bring out your measuring tape and start saying, well, how wide is this? How wide is this part? How high is it? Is it perfectly round or is it approximately round? Why is it this color? Why isn't it some other color? What is inside? Tell me, if you're looking for a fundamental reality, how is any of that going to be useful? Not at all. In the same way, to inquire into the nature of world. So many people ask the philosophical question, what is the nature of time? It sounds so profound. What is the nature of time? From a Vedantic standpoint, it's like saying, why is this reddish in color? Who cares? If you're after a fundamental reality, focus on that, not on all the nama, rupa, including time. Okay, a good place to conclude for today. We'll take more questions next week. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschad dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om.